This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 130, entitled MGTOW/Masculist Political Agenda. Description. This flyer claims that the idea of population annihilation is so powerful, in brackets, that is, if the gender politicians don't menfair the gender laws and menfair society, then the MGTOW/Masculists will continue to wipe out whole populations by continuing to reject paternity, close brackets. That it should be the linchpin of a MGTOW/Masculist political agenda to achieve MGTOW/Masculist goals. Now the flyer itself. The MGTOW/Masculist political agenda. In the 600s AD, Arabs had low status. They were looked down upon by their Christian and Jewish neighbours, largely because they were still polytheists, that is, believing in many gods, which was considered less sophisticated and lower class by their more sophisticated monotheist neighbours. Along came Muhammad, an intelligent, open-minded, curious, camel-trained trader who picked up the teachings of the Christians and the Jews and was deeply influenced by them as a result of his extensive travels due to the nature of his job. He also noticed how Christians and Jews reacted towards Arabs, taking a very condescending attitude. He did not like this, so he invented a monotheistic god for the Arabs, called Allah. In brackets, humanity has invented over 100,000 different gods over the broad sweep of history and across the planet, according to the cultural anthropologists who specialize in the anthropology of religion. Close brackets. Suddenly, Arabs were on an equal footing with the Christians and the Jews. All three were now monotheistic cultures, and this new equal status had a profoundly cathartic effect on the Arab mind. Arabs went bananas. Their self-image, their self-confidence, their energy shot up. They then used their new collective self-confidence to conquer the Middle East, North Africa, and even Spain, and would have gone further into Europe if they had not been stopped by the French in a famous battle. So, what this says to me is that it's possible for a new idea, a new belief system, to profoundly galvanize a people, or a community, or a social movement. That's how I'm now thinking and feeling about the MGTOW/Masculist movements. We have a new idea, an immensely powerful idea that will allow us to do what monotheism, Islam, did for the Arabs. That single galvanizing idea is, in capitals and quotes, unless you gender politicians menfair the gender laws and menfair our misandrist society, we MGTOW/Masculists will wipe out the whole population by continuing to refuse paternity. End quote. The more I think about this idea, the more potent and important it becomes as it sinks deep into my subconscious. It has tremendous power and cannot be refuted. It's impossible for the gender politicians and, more importantly, the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists who bribe and control them to force men to be fathers. So if the gender laws remain as toxic as they are today, with one married father in 4 getting financially massacred in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts, losing his kids, his house, paying child support and alimony to his parasitic fluffy ex-wife, with no paternity rejection rate, etc., MGTOW/Masculists will continue to boycott marriage and paternity, resulting in the population size continuing to crash. The gender politicians are powerless to stop this unless they make a concerted effort to menfair the gender laws by reforming the divorce laws, bringing in the removing across the board the many legal and social discriminations against men. So with this powerful new idea in mind, the MGTOW/Masculist movements can be given a new cathartic ideology that will have the power to fulfill their agenda, namely to create a FIP society, capital F, capital S, where both sexes are FIPs, financially independent persons, pulling their own weight financially by getting a career-competent education, that is, not studying fluffy crap at high school and college, by giving men menfair gender laws, by threatening the gender politicians with population annihilation and their assassination by an alarmed general public, by teaching everyone that men are the superior sex, since men outperform women at the top end of the scale in nearly all measurable performance tests, by creating a social ethic that it is immoral to dump on men the way fluffy feminists do, blaming men for women's inadequacies, by reforming the media so that it portrays men in a menfair light, etc. This is our MGTOW/Masculist agenda, and we have the tool, the major idea, to achieve it now. Let's label this idea population annihilation. That is, if society, if the gender politicians don't menfair the gender laws and menfair society, then the MGTOW/Masculists will continue their policy, their political agenda of rejecting paternity and hence seeing the whole population get wiped out. Armed with this formidable weapon, we can approach the media, the gender politicians, society, fluffies, fluffy crappers, fluffy feminists, etc., and tell them, do what we want, that is menfair the gender laws and menfair society, or we MGTOWs/Masculists wipe it out by refusing to reproduce. Masculists are more politically minded than MGTOWs, who have a tendency to simply passively walk away from the marriage market and paternity, spending their money on themselves and thus showing no solidarity towards the suffering and gender oppression of fellow men. MGTOWs do this because they're convinced that trying to persuade the gender politicians to menfair the gender laws is a complete waste of time and energy, because more women vote than men. So the bribed, corrupted gender politicians, manipulated by the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists, don't give a shit about the welfare of men, thus allowing the current misandrocentric culture to continue. But with the new formidable weapon, with the idea of population annihilation, MGTOWs can join forces with the Masculists to use this powerful weapon to create a FIP, men-faired society that both MGTOWs and Masculists want. To Masculists, MGTOW is a subset of Masculism. The indirect political strategy of the MGTOWs is to bring down the gynocentric culture by refusing to play along with it. This is a good strategy and an effective one that the more politically minded Masculists can use to great effect. MGTOWs need to be more conscious, more aware of just how powerful the idea of population annihilation is, and bring it to full consciousness, and then really use it politically by teaching it to the media, to society, to every college, to every high school, to fluffies, to fluffy crappers, to fluffy feminists, and especially to the gender politicians. The US dollar will crash soon. This is a mathematical certainty, as the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists continue to print at least $1 trillion a year to cover the US annual federal budget deficit and insert it round the world. Those countries holding US dollars in their reserves are losing money as the value of the dollar drops. When the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists set up the Fed in 1913, a dollar today would buy what 3 cents would buy then. They have so inflated the cost of living that people's savings get wiped out. Just one of the many crimes against humanity committed by these hated Jewish bankster Satanists. Google it, YouTube it. When the dollar crashes, the US will only be able to import what it can afford to export, which will not be much, because the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists have sent most of America's manufacturing capacity to China. So the US standard of living will fall to third world levels. Civil war may break out as a result, with the Americans having more guns than people. So hopefully the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanists get wiped out, freeing politics from their bribery and corruption. Hopefully then a new batch of gender politicians will arise who will be menfair and create the new menfair gender laws. If the Jewish banksters, via the Jewish bankster-controlled Department of Homeland Security, that's DHS, win the civil war with their militarized police, their 3 billion hollow-tipped bullets that they've bought, their millions of 4-body plastic coffins, their thousands of suburban tanks, their police state executive orders that Obama has been signing, that he was brought in by the Jewish banksters to do, their 800 FEMA concentration camps, their Jewish bankster control of the media, of the news outlets, of the publishing industry, of Hollywood, etc., then we all lose. These hated Jewish banksters may actually win the Civil War, and then the US becomes like the country I live in, China, a police state shithole, with no freedom of speech, with over 1,000 concentration camps for political prisoners called Lao Gai, with a one-party dictatorship that has killed 80 million of its own citizens under Mao, that's Mao Zedong, an intellectually sterile culture, one pathetic science Nobel Prize, no alphabet, etc. If Americans lose their civil war against the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanist shadow government, then their fate will be the same as the Chinese. These hated Jewish banksters created the so-called Russian Revolution, actually a Jewish putsch, and then helped Mao do the same in China. So it may very well be possible that the hated Jewish banksters have controlled Russia and China for a century, and are currently well underway to doing the same to the US, Europe and Japan. All three of these powerhouses are almost totally destroyed by debt imposed on them by the hated Jewish bankster paper currency debt note Ponzi schemes designed to make debt slaves of the world. But let's assume Americans win their civil war and that this process takes less than a decade. Hitler showed that an economy can bounce back quickly when the hated Jewish bankster's paper currency debt note Ponzi scheme is removed, so that a people's bank with a debt-free currency can thrive. Hitler put 6 million unemployed Germans back to work within 2 years, the main reason why he was so massively popular with the Germans. He was their saviour. He was all, in parentheses, he was also the saviour of Western Europeans, because in 1941 Stalin had amassed a 6 million army of Russian soldiers to invade Europe. Hitler got wind of this and invaded Russia 2 weeks before the European invasion was meant to start. Hitler saved Western Europe from the same kind of Holocaust the Jewish communists committed against white Christian Russians, killing 66 million of them, according to the famous author Solzhenitsyn in his book, Die Juden in der Sowjetunion. It's German for the Jews in the Soviet Union. That the Jewish publishers blocked from publication in the English-speaking countries, but not in Germany, which was very popular in Germany and massively popular in the Soviet Union. A similar economic miracle can occur in the US with a post-Jewish bankster-controlled economy. Americans are the most creative people on earth. So with the hated Jewish banksters out of the picture, that is, either fled or murdered in the Civil War by death squads crossing off names on a blacklist, the US economy will be able to spring back to life and truly thrive. In such an economic environment, and free of the hated Jewish bankster Frankist Satanism with its poisoning of the souls of the people, the US and hence MGTOW/Masculism will hopefully become unnecessary, because we will have a new society, a FIP society, where the media, the politicians, Hollywood, publishing, the news outlets, etc. are freed from the hated Jewish bankster Satanist influence. In such a post-Jewish bankster-controlled environment, society will be a lot fairer, more humane, more ethical, and hence MGTOW/Masculism can quietly fade away because it will no longer be needed. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channel name De Garis Masculist MGTOW Flyers. Ciao.